Well, happy Tuesday here. A special time today, Tuesday afternoon. A happy Apple iPhone event day. Very excited to spend the morning watching that. Very excited. USB-C coming to the iPhone. Crazy world of sports right now. Probably not the most top of mind, the CFL right now with everything going on with Monday Night Football. But we have made a commitment every week. We're going to do this. We have Jason Hussey here. And Evan, how are we doing, guys?
Doing great, Reed. Exciting weekend of football with the CFL triple header on Saturday, and of course the NFL starting up this weekend. So I think we have a lot to talk about CFL wise this week.
Yeah, Evan, how are you doing? It's been a roller coaster of emotions for sports and football fans here the last 24 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're recording late this week, and obviously the CFL slate ended early with the NFL coming in. So we're going to have to refresh our memory, I think, on a couple things. But just looking at CFL specifically, I mean, it was a pretty good slate. There were some blowouts, some revenge games, there was a mix, like the Hamilton-Ottawa game we'll get into. Thought that one was definitely interesting. And yeah, I mean, overall, another good week of football, especially when you incorporate the NFL into it.
Yeah, it's crazy now. A lot of football, it definitely feels like a distant memory. We've had a lot of, the Jets need to sign Nathan Rourke right now. The Jets need to call Nathan Rourke. I guarantee you, Justin Dunk and Ryan Ballantyne, friends of the podcast, he is probably the furthest thing from the Jets' mind right now. I think Colin Kaepernick has a better chance of getting back on the Jets roster here than Nathan Rourke does. But we'll see. We'll see. Stranger things have happened. Jason, the Labor Day weekend was pretty good. We were hoping for some good rematches this weekend. Maybe not as exciting as we maybe had hoped. Some blowouts here. What did you make of kind of the weekend slate overall?
I thought it was very dichotomous because I think that we had two really good games. I mean, one game didn't start off very good, but it ended very good on Friday night with Hamilton and Ottawa. But Calgary and Edmonton was a pretty good game throughout with, the crazy comeback that the Elks were able to come up with in this one. And then obviously those first two games of the Saturday triple header were kind of disappointing, but I didn't really I don't think that was unexpected.
Yeah, really kind of disappointing. Saskatchewan, they kind of had their big stand, and we're coming in, we're doing the Banjo Bowl, and we don't want to call it the Banjo Bowl, but everyone knows what it is, and they really kind of stunk up the place there. We'll kind of dissect that, but I mean, 50 burger by Winnipeg here going on Saskatchewan. Evan, what did you make overall of the weekend?
Yeah, definitely a mixed bag. Like I pointed out, there was some revenge games. You look at, obviously, Winnipeg and Saskatchewan, which maybe wasn't entertaining, especially if you were a Roughriders fan, but I think the people there in Winnipeg enjoyed that. Obviously, the best one, Calgary had a big fourth quarter comeback last week against Edmonton and pulled that one out at home in the Labor Day Classic. And then this week it flipped. Edmonton, I think, had 18 points in the fourth quarter and rallied all the way to beat Calgary at the end. So both of those games, back-to-back weekends coming down at the end of the fourth quarter, I thought that was very entertaining. And then, as I pointed out too before, Hamilton, Ottawa, as Jason said, a slow start. It definitely wasn't. It didn't look to be an entertaining game, and I almost switched the channel off at halftime, but. Then things started heating up, and it ended up being a kind of back and forth shootout match at the end, and eventually Hamilton pulled away, which was the expected result, at least in my opinion. So I think that's that.
Yeah, Lund here is ready. Check it in. I'm ready to hear how good the Bombers are. Thanks. The rum hut was slowing by halftime. Yeah, I have to imagine that. Did you guys see the story? I think we shared in the group chat. The bartender that was going to buy drinks for the bar if the Jets lost last night, and then the Jets came back and won, and everyone realized they had to pay their tabs. And then we have James here. I wish I cared about the NFL. I've been watching the CFL football for 35 years. XFL dealt with it. This is the time of year. Real football's been back. I tweet all that stuff too, but. Exciting here talking CFL today. Let's get into this. So Mayer here, 21-29, kind of similar stat line for him. I know we've talked a lot about this kind of throughout the last however many weeks. Jason, what did you make of our boy Jake Mayer here on the loss?
I didn't think he played that poorly. I thought you saw a lot of good from him. And I thought at times during this game, I was like, this was the Stampeders team we saw for large portions of last year where they were a 12-6 team. Maybe they couldn't compete with the big dogs, but I mean, they were a very good team, at least record-wise last season. And I thought that, in this game, they had some really good stretches. They had a really good drive in the second quarter. They capped that off with a touchdown to think it was William Longley, the fullback of all people. And then they got another touchdown before the half to Reggie Bagleton. So Jake Maier was very good in the first half of this game, but I think the Elks made some adjustments defensively in the second half, and really this Stampeders offense really stalled out the rest of the game.
Yeah, looking here, Trey Ford, that not maybe his weakest game thus far in terms of stats and everything. Evan, what did you make of this?
Well, I think from the Calgary perspective, I mean, you look at Jake Maier, he had a very, I guess, admirable performance, nothing too over the top. But I was really more impressed with, I think, the balance on the Calgary offense between their run game and the pass game. Unfortunately, they didn't come out victorious, but I really liked what they were able to do with Kadeem Carey, and then they had enough receivers step up to where I feel like, again, it was a very balanced outing. And we haven't seen a lot of that from them this year. I think we've described their offense many times as being one-dimensional in a way, where they can only, they're only doing certain things, and a lot of those things don't involve, big plays or chunk yardage or anything like that. But then if you want to talk about Edmonton and Trey Ford, it was very interesting because I didn't watch a lot of this game, and initially when I saw the final score, I thought, Trey Ford would have had a better outing, but then I looked at the stat line and I was a bit confused. I mean, again, great day rushing, which is normal from him, 8 carries for 82 yards, which somehow gets lost because Kevin Brown had such a good game, and we'll get into that a bit later. But just specifically about Trey Ford, I expected him, to do maybe a bit more in this game from the passing department, and I've said that about him many times. And maybe I don't know if this would be bringing up a weird analogy, but I'm at LSU and we have a quarterback, Jaden Daniels, who I've said the same thing about on some occasions, where he might. We always praise him for his rushing ability and his ability to get through defenders. He's very shifty, but sometimes when it comes to passing, there's a bit that needs to improve. And again, both of these guys are still very good quarterbacks. That's what's most important. We've made jokes about the Lamar running back joke was a thing for years, and we've moved on from that. But my point here being, ultimately the quarterback's job more than anything is to throw the ball effectively, even though there are a lot of great two-way players, like I've just mentioned, Trey Ford here, and then who I compared him to, Jaden Daniels here at LSU. A lot of good two-way players, but ultimately from him, I think Trey Ford, this game, it almost brought me back down to earth a bit, where I'm like, okay, he still has a bit of work to do in that department. Now, again, doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback, but that might get overshadowed just because the Elks won. But again, I don't want to take anything away from their win and their ultimate performance.
Yeah, Kevin Brown here having a day. And I think, it seems to me, at least, it took him a little bit here to kind of pick up. And I know we had the Wilder and all of that last season. And then he got injured, and he's done. A friend of the podcast. He's a funny guy. But it's good to see. What do you make of that, Jason, here? Kevin Brown really kind of coming. I mean, this was a crazy game. I think probably his most impressive game to date.
Yeah, I think the best thing to happen to Kevin Brown was Trey Ford being inserted into this lineup, because now the defense has to account for Trey Ford, and that's opened up running lanes, especially inside for Kevin Brown. That first touchdown of the game, he went right up the middle for, I think a 45-yard touchdown. So, I mean, I think Kevin Brown, has arguably the best home run hitting ability of any running back in the CFL. And we've seen that, especially the last couple of weeks, or even dating back a couple of weeks more to that game against Winnipeg, where he had that big run to open that game. So, I mean, he's been incredibly impressive. And the Elks just incredibly impressive how far they've came from just a few short weeks. I mean, they've gone from a team that lost 22 consecutive games at home with several blown leads in those losses, mind you, to a team that just overcame a 16-point fourth quarter deficit to win consecutive home games. So there has to be some positive momentum, even though the Elks are probably pretty far out of the playoff race at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't know, here we were calling for Chris Jones's head, for weeks here, and now it kind of looks like they've turned it around. And I don't know if that was, obviously putting Trey Ford in, and kind of, I will still never understand that entire scenario where, Chris Jones was the one that, scouted and signed Trey Ford. He was the one that moved to draft him and then didn't want to play him. And, I've heard Victor Quee, and there was different sides or whatever. Evan, what are you grading Coach Jones's performance on now? Because, if they come around here and at least are respectable, I don't hear people calling for Chris Jones's head right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chris Jones, obviously, since Trey Ford has been inserted into the lineup, this team looks a lot more prepared and obviously a lot more competitive. I think that goes without saying. But for me personally, even during the period where the Elks were losing games and it looked like there was no hope, I mean, from the player personnel standpoint, I always thought they had a lot of talent. And we just talked about a guy, Kevin Brown. We've mentioned him a couple times on the show, but I feel like he is continuously one of the most underrated running backs in the CFL. And again, part of that might just be because the team wasn't winning. There weren't a lot of people watching, but it's clear that this guy, has some serious maybe all-star level capability nearly. Definitely was showing it in this game. And then obviously like Gino Lewis, that was one of the big storylines, like him coming over to Edmonton. We all thought that was kind of the big deal, especially because they didn't have Kenny Lawler anymore. They had moved on from that. And, Gino Lewis was kind of a big acquisition, again, coming over from Montreal. And in this game, he showed why, he's still important and why he's still one of the best receivers in the league. Obviously, he's dealt with some injuries this year. It's ultimately been a bit slower with the quarterback change and just an overall, I think, slower offense at times. But, I mean, they're turning it around, and again, I think Chris Jones and the rest of that Elks team are extremely respectable right now, and it's been good. I mean, they really did, again, they have saved their season, I would say, because right now I look at the Elks as a team that can win games and that can compete with, I wouldn't say the top teams in the league, but they can certainly compete against, teams, I guess, somewhat at their level and maybe a bit above that. I'm really glad to see that because, again, a couple weeks ago, it was almost like an apocalyptic scenario where the whole thing was going to blow up. Everyone was going to get fired. No one was going to have a job. But now that's changed a bit, and I think that's really important, especially for this team moving forward. A lot of what I look at is 2024. Where is this team going to go after this season? Because as much as there's been improvement, I mean, you can't forget about what's happened before that and the Victor Cui departure. You cannot overlook that. So I look at 2024 and I see there will still be some change, I think, but ultimately they have some pieces there that I think they really need to keep and they can build something off of. So ultimately very happy with the direction things are heading compared to, again, what it was. I think we're all a bit happy that it's just that ship has sailed and there's at least decent football that we can watch from Edmonton now.
To me, and I agree with you. Like, to me, I can see Edmonton. I can see them progressing here and growing. I don't know what to make of Calgary, and I haven't this entire season. And in 1 week they're good, and 1 week they're bad. I mean, we were hoping for a little bit more separation here in the standings. Obviously, with them splitting the home and home. Like, Jason, you know what I'm saying? Like, I still don't know who Calgary is here, and we're week 14.
Yeah, I think they're the most baffling team in the CFL so far this season. And I think that the best way that I could put it is that they lack composure out there, especially late in games. They've been in a lot of close games this year where they've just kind of, lost their composure and they haven't been able to close games out, whether that be offensively and many times defensively as well. So I think back, if they just win one or two of those games, I think back to that game they played Dustin Crum against Ottawa earlier this year. They win one of those games or one or two of those games this season, they're in a completely different situation right now. And I feel like their season could be in a different place. So I think it's quite baffling how they've been so far this season.
Yeah, we had a comment here, and Edmonton showing up, and I had a tweet to pull up here too. Edmonton crowd impressive through 2000 shows that they were a good team. They would lead the league in attendance, and I had a tweet from Dan Barnes talking about that. Like, you can just feel momentum going right now in their direction. So I guess that's good. I mean, they're probably going to miss the playoffs and end up whatever, but at least, like Evan said, looking forward to 2024, maybe we have some hope. Any other players you want to highlight here, Evan, and then we can give Jason his thoughts as well.
I don't think so. Maybe if I go back to Calgary, I mean, Mark and Michelle and Reggie Bagleton, I mean, those are definitely two players, I think, in Calgary that have stood out all year, especially Bagleton, because, I mean, well, he's been there for a long time. Michelle, obviously, coming back later from the NFL. But, those two guys, I think, are really holding a lot together right now. And if you want to talk about Calgary in the big picture, I can give my 2 cents on that.
Yep.
Very similar thing to Edmonton. I think there's change coming in 2024, and this team for me in 2023 has been an extremely mixed bag. Some weeks I think they're still a playoff caliber team. Other weeks I think they need to blow it all up and restart, and that I guess their reign is kind of over given how many years they've been in the playoffs. It's a challenging time, and I think there's probably a lot of mixed emotions and a lot of different ways that this could go. Specifically with Jake Mayer, I feel the same way. I was really excited, when he came into this season having full reign because Bo Levi was gone. I had been waiting on that for a long time. I've always talked about, Jake Maier was one of the first guys I really dove deeply into with the CFL. And he had an opportunity this year to take over the team and be the quarterback. And so far, mixed bag. Some weeks, like I saw him live this year in BC, and, that game, it looked like he could have been benched. And then there's other weeks where, he's dialing it up for 350 yards, whatever, 3 touchdowns. And you think, geez, there's a lot to work with there. So, again, depending on, what happens when it comes to personnel and coaching, that might decide, where Jake Maier is moving forward, or what happens to him, what his position becomes. But, Calgary, there's a lot of question marks there too. They're definitely not safe just because they've been well off in the past. I mean, football is a business. It only really matters what you do now. Yeah, great. Calgary was in the playoffs for X many years before this, but one bad season can really change the tide of things, especially when, as Jason mentioned, had you won 1 or 2 more games, and they've been in so many close games this year, again, the other part of me feels like this team could, almost have a winning record. They could be, a 7-win team as opposed to a 4-win team. And that would really, I think, change the outlook of things. So I don't know. Again, it's a complex issue for the Calgary Edmonton matchup intrigues me. Both of those have intrigued me the past 2 weekends, just because I feel like there's so many different directions in where those teams could go. I mean, you look at, it's such a different scenario compared to obviously like a Toronto or, Winnipeg, where you're not going to change anything and everything just kind of works out as usual. But anything can happen. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, the CFL season's long. I think the Elks have just dug themselves too big of a hole here at this point. Jason, any other players you want to highlight on this before we move on?
I think I'm good for players I want to highlight, but I think that it's interesting because Edmonton travels to Saskatchewan next week. Obviously, 2 really close games between those 2 teams earlier this season. I am going to be taking Edmonton to win that game, spoiler alert. And I think for Calgary, their season's basically on life support after this loss, mainly because Hamilton's picked up a couple of, I wouldn't say an unexpected victory this week against Ottawa, but a couple of weeks ago against BC, Hamilton has 1 or 2 more victories than you would have expected at this point. I think Calgary was really banking on that, and I think that the path forward for them to get into the playoffs is almost impossible at this point. Although I think a lot of things have to happen for them to get back into it.
Well, and it's certainly going here on the bye week doesn't help next week as well. In terms of kind of getting momentum, I guess, rework kind of whatever, but yeah, it does feel like they're going to kind of be the last man kind of looking out. I have the standings here, but I don't know. We'll see. I like I said, we were hoping for a little bit more separation there and kind of getting an identity of one of these teams. Moving on. This was, what was it? Was it last week or the week before where Caleros threw like 6 interceptions and then 2 of them were pick sixes and they still won the game? I mean, here to throw 5 touchdowns, very impressive day, very impressive working day for Blue Bombers. Probably the best game, statistically Caleros has had in a long time. We'll go first to Evan here. 50 burger against Saskatchewan at home. I mean, the Riders just didn't show up.
Yeah, Saskatchewan looked shell-shocked early, I think is the term I'll use. And Winnipeg, they're one of those teams where, again, I always talk about, even if this team has a fluke or a bad day, as they did against Saskatchewan in the Labor Day Classic, they had a tight loss. And it was just, I think that, gave them motivation, obviously, to go back and play Saskatchewan in Winnipeg, the week after in the Banjo Bowl. Yeah, I was really impressed with Winnipeg. When that team comes out firing, I mean, they mean business. Like, it was an absolute clinic. And, I mean, if you look at, Zach Caleros, 18 of 21 passing, 319 yards, 5 touchdowns. I mean, the game was over in the first half. That's all you really need to know. And I watched the first half of this game, and then I didn't watch any more of that because, obviously, you knew it was going to happen. But, I again, extremely impressed with Winnipeg. But outside of Zach Caleros and their receivers, putting in a lot of the work, the one guy that I really want to give credit to more than anybody is Brady Oliveira. We've obviously discussed him on the show at some point this season, but I feel like I haven't given him enough credit. He's really been carrying the rock, and again, I think maybe we're just kind of used to it now, so we're a bit more quiet about it. But I really have to give some credit out to Brady Oliveira. I mean, in this game specifically, he looked like the best running back in the CFL. And, I would definitely say, he's up there when it comes to the AJ Ouellette's and the James Butlers of the world. I mean, he's really doing a great job. So shout out to Brady Oliveira, and he's been there now. I think this is his 4th season, if you don't count the COVID year. I think he's been there since 2019. So, he was still around when they had Andrew Harris, and he's been a really, I guess you'd say, developmental piece, but it's certainly paid off. And, obviously in this game, I can't imagine how much it hurt for Saskatchewan. But the other guy, too, I mean, Dalton Schoen, who was one of the top receivers in the league last year. I mean, not slowing down at all. 5 catches, 104 yards, 3 touchdowns. And I think all those were in the first half as well. You just couldn't stop them. You just couldn't stop them. And Winnipeg, after they scored the first, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 touchdowns, I knew that the game was going to end up like this and that there was no looking back. I mean, I'm surprised, Saskatchewan, the fact that game was 3-0 with a Saskatchewan lead at one point early in the first was incredible to me. I mean, Winnipeg really just, they when they get hot, they get really hot. And I think this was the best reminder of it that we've had in quite some time. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I had put up here Eddie Steele, friend of the show. Great Elks comeback tonight. But the story of the day is this: Winnipeg takes things very personally. They embarrass the Roughriders the way that's quite possibly hard to do in pro football, flat out. Jason, what did you make of those comments and then the game?
Well, I mean, I just think the Bombers are just a team that has that championship makeup and that ability to respond to, tough games. And I think that I can't think of the last time that this team's lost consecutive games. I mean, you have to go back. I think they said until 2019, they were saying on the broadcast when Zach Claris wasn't even there, the last time they lost consecutive games. So, I mean, they just have such a tough mentality as a team. And I mean, this game is just not unexpected for me. I think that going into this one, I thought Winnipeg would probably bounce back in a big way. Didn't think it was going to be 51-6, but at the same time, I thought that Winnipeg would come out and make a statement in this one. And I thought that, the Riders defense was just overwhelmed by that matchup against those Winnipeg receivers. Lawler and Schoen, just such a combination. And then Oliveira really doing his thing. We have a really good competition for most outstanding Canadian in the CFL this year with Betts and Oliveira. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what player takes hold of that down the stretch. But Oliveira, if he keeps on putting up performances like this, he could be in the MOP conversation as well. So I think that's basically all I have to say for this game.
Rain just rolled in here. I'm sitting outside this beautiful day. So hopefully, I'm under an umbrella. So hopefully it doesn't get too crazy here, but we might have to relocate the Mark house inside here. We'll see what's going on. Our dog just ran in. Yeah. Winnipeg has, like we said, that run it up ability here and certainly, coming in, and we know the divisional rivalry and kind of all of that stuff, but really remarkable. And I don't know, I can't get to beat up Saskatchewan either. I mean, I know they had the comeback last week and won, in the Labor Day game, but it doesn't feel like they're built to, come back from what is this, 20. I mean, this game was over halftime. I mean, they're down, what is it, 30? I can't even do the math here. Craziness. Evan, in terms of our boy Delagala, what did you make of him here in the first half? And at least they had a chance.
Well, I mean, the commentators were saying it's kind of hard to get a feel of what Jake Dolegala, did in that game because he just wasn't on the field that much. They had a lot of 3-and-outs, and Winnipeg just kept scoring, and there just wasn't really a whole lot of opportunities for him. So, I mean, he was able to, still get the ball out a couple times and finished with a respectable completion percentage, but as you can obviously see, barely any yards and didn't find the end zone. Yeah, really just not much there. And I mean, you could say that about the entire Saskatchewan team on both sides of the football. When you're only scoring 6 points and the game is over by halftime, I mean, there's really just not a lot to discuss. I mean, just look at that graphic there. I mean, everything, is Winnipeg pretty much, except for, I guess, what is that? Losses?
The team, yeah. Team losses.
So as you can tell, I mean, that's what that graphic pretty much defines what domination means in a football game.
In terms of the rivalry here, Jason, I mean, we're 50-50 over the weekend, between the two weekends, but I would certainly say that Winnipeg came out of the home and home looking a little bit better. What did you make of that, just the divisional rivalry of it?
Oh, I think Saskatchewan's probably happy that they were even able to steal one of these games. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they respond going forward, because I think this kind of reminds me of how Ottawa was earlier this season. They had the two dramatic victories against Winnipeg and Calgary, and then they've slid ever since then. Will Saskatchewan have a slump after this game? We'll have to see if they kind of got exposed by Winnipeg in this one, and if they kind of go on a slide of their own here.
Yeah, I was at the Mariner game last night with Matt Baker, the BC Lions, and we were talking, Lions here, and I said, if BC does not win at home against Ottawa, like, I'm calling the season. Like, this is it. I mean, Ottawa has fallen off a cliff, and we'll get to all of that. But I mean, yeah, you're certainly you look at these teams differently. I don't know, Saskatchewan, I can't get a beat for either. It feels like kind of like, last week, crazy and the big dramatic, they won right in overtime and everything. And then here, I don't know. To me, it's still kind of the same old Rough Riders. Evan, any other thoughts on this one?
I don't think so. I do agree with the point that Saskatchewan, they definitely fluctuate a bit too. But fortunately for them, they're on the winning side of things. Like I've brought this up at so many points during the season, but I viewed Saskatchewan and Calgary for a long time in similar ways, because they were both in a playoff race, and you didn't really know how to feel about them. Like on a week-to-week basis, it just changed so much. But ultimately, again, Saskatchewan is now at 500, and they have an opportunity to get back over 500 where they were going into this game. So, things are still, I think, looking upward for them. Jake Dolegala has really improved in a short amount of time. I know there were some questions around him too, but clearly I think he's the better option than Mason Fine. And I had a hunch that was always the case, even before he really got onto the field. Dolegala I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, ultimately Saskatchewan just, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, when you lose 51-6, it's kind of hard to take away positives from that. But I do think that, this is far from the end of the road for them, obviously.
Man, it is really bad right now. I'm trying to scoot over here. I wasn't prepared for this. I know I was looking here at the schedule, next week, obviously Saskatchewan going into Ottawa, that should be a win. We got to see here BC. I mean, they've got a couple easy games with, Ottawa at home, and then here going into Edmonton. I would like to think the BC Lions would be favored at Edmonton. So we'll kind of see how these standings shake up. But I don't know. To me, it's still going to be, I don't know. I see the semifinals, Saskatchewan comes into BC and loses the same way Calgary did last year. I mean, do you see the division shaking out differently here, Jason?
I think that no, I think the standings as they are the standings that we're going to get at the end of the season. I think that Calgary's not going to be able to catch Hamilton. Calgary's not going to be able to catch Saskatchewan. So I think at the end of the day, unless there's a collapse from both of those teams and Calgary does something super unexpected, because I think Ottawa and Edmonton, I think they're a little bit too far out of it to make a run at this point.
We'll have this conversation later, obviously towards the end of the season. But Calgary, are we expecting wholesale changes after this season? I mean, I feel like they got to do something here after coming up short the last few years. Jason?
No, I don't think there will be change, at least in terms of the GM and head coach position. I think Dave Dickinson will be given another year to sort things out. Whether that's right or wrong, I think a lot of it, the blame actually should be assigned to him because of the poor play calling and misusage of some of the weapons that they've had on that offense this year. But I think one move we could see is that he takes hold of the offensive coordinator job again. So maybe he becomes just like Chris Jones, holding 3 jobs there in Calgary. But he was an offensive coordinator with this team before when he was the head coach at the start. And that's actually how he got the head coaching job in Calgary. He was the offensive coordinator and got promoted to head coach. So I could see him taking hold of the offensive coordinator job again and, trying to get the things back on the rails here. But I think at the end of the day, maybe Jake Maier gets ousted as the starter here, but I don't know. I'm really not sure what to make of Calgary in terms of what they're going to be doing going into the offseason, because they've never quite been in this position before since I've started watching the CFL.
That's my thing is you say, yeah, do you move on from Maier? And I would ask the same thing, but you're like, well, who else do you go with? I don't even know. I don't, if Maier's not the guy. Evan, any thoughts on that or anything else on this game before we move on?
Well, I mean, I think if we want to talk about Calgary and Jake Maier again briefly, yeah, I mean, the big question is, like, in my opinion, you don't move on from Jake Maier because Maier's been in that system now it's going on. Well, this is year 3. And, yeah, I mean, like you could replace him if you really felt like that, but that obviously involves, trading for somebody, and you might be giving up a lot of additional assets that you're not ready to move on from. You don't want to take that jump. And like, if your plan is to just sign a new quarterback, well, I mean, we look at the quarterback pool right now. I mean, even at the NFL level, when it comes to free agency, just not a whole lot of guys available that necessarily look better than, what Jake Maier offers right now up there in Calgary. So, yeah, I don't know. Again, this is a complex issue, right? I think it all comes down to the people who are making those decisions, and they'll obviously make the decisions that they feel are right, and they have a lot more knowledge of those situations than we do, just sitting here talking about it. But will be an interesting storyline to follow with Calgary more than anybody, because as Jason has pointed out, they don't lose. They're not a losing team. They don't have a losing culture. Yes, they're not necessarily Winnipeg or Toronto becoming a perennial championship caliber team, but they're always in the playoffs and they're always competing. And this year, I mean, it just really hasn't felt like that for a majority of it.
Let's move on here. We have Montreal and Toronto. I don't know. I'm really curious here with Montreal back to 500. They had stacked some wins earlier in the season, felt like they were getting momentum. Obviously, coming into Toronto is a difficult task, and they're kind of on a different level this year. We had Mike Hogan on the podcast talking about that and just kind of historically how they are right now. Jason, what do you make of Montreal? And it seems like their season, I mean, okay, we're still second in the East, but it doesn't feel like they have a lot of juice right now.
Yeah, I think I sound like a broken record here every time I talk about the Alouettes, but I mean, like, they're just kind of stuck in the middle. They can beat every other team in the CFL other than Toronto, BC, and Winnipeg. So after next week, they play Toronto again. So they're going to probably be 6-7 after next week. But then the schedule lightens up after that, and they don't play any of those big 3 teams again, I don't believe. So, I mean, do they run the table and go to 11-7 this year? That's quite possible given what we've seen from them so far this season. But I also think their offense has really regressed. I think one quote from the broadcast that really stood out to me was Paul Apolli saying that he was looking at Montreal during the week. He was saying that the explosive plays for Montreal, the first 5 weeks of the season, they were one of the best teams in the CFL at creating explosive plays, but that's dropped off dramatically since the first 5 weeks of the season. So, I mean, I think that kind of tells a lot of the story with the Alouettes offense. It's really been poor the last month or so.
Yeah, this is what kills. I mean, this is, I know sports in general, and we're living through this right now with the Mariners, and we're trying, we're in the AL West and trying to kind of compete for one of those playoff spots. And we went into Tampa over the weekend and just got completely hosed, right? And you're like, well, yeah, but if we win, I'm like, yeah, but like, even then, if you get to the playoffs, you're not going to win any of these games, right? You're not going to win. Like you're saying, okay, Montreal can win except any good teams. Okay, well, so then okay, we make it to the first round of the playoffs, and then kind of at what at what point, right? With some of these players, I remember on Good Morning Football, they were saying like, some of these players, like, I don't want to make the playoffs. Like, if we're not gonna, like, I'd rather take vacation early. Like, what's the point of making it to the first round of the playoffs just to get blown out? I mean, the Seahawks did that last year against the 49ers. I don't know, Evan. What do you make Montreal here? It really seems like they're kind of faltering.
Well, as Jason pointed out, the biggest problem all season has been their failure to separate themselves. You don't know what exactly they are, and you don't know what they aren't, because they are smack dab in the middle. Like, it is the hardest definition of being in the middle that I've seen in a long time. You cannot beat the teams above you, but you'll beat everybody below you. And until that changes, I really can't define an identity for that team right now. I will say I do agree. I think the offense is there's definitely some questions there. The season started off and it looked like they were looking pretty good on offense. They were rolling. Again, they still have a lot of pieces I like. I feel like their offense has one of the higher ceilings in the league, but they don't. I wouldn't say they haven't tapped into that exactly. So yeah, down the stretch, like they play Toronto next week, as Jason pointed out. You go to 6-7, and then maybe you're at 11-7 at the end of the season if everything goes right. I'd say realistically more like 10-8. But then like, they're going to get into the playoffs, and it's just going to be. I mean, I don't want to say pointless, because those players are still playing for something, and they're still motivated, and they're still very talented. but it's going to be really difficult, and everyone already knows, what's likely to happen. So I don't know, like at 10-8, did you accomplish something in the season? Yes, but you didn't win in the playoffs, so it just kind of feels like the year isn't wasted, but it's also like you left a lot on the table. Again, just a very interesting position, but I feel like the Alouettes in the playoffs will certainly look better than, say, Hamilton. The whole Hamilton situation might take away from some of what Montreal has going on in terms of their struggles, just because, people are going to look at the Ticats and think, geez, I mean, that's going to be one of the worst, playoff teams maybe ever, or certainly in the last couple of years. Like, they're just not a very good-looking team in multiple facets of the game. So, again, it's been that all has to do with just how the season has played out in the standings. Some very unique things going on, and it looks like we're going to have a this, given how I've just described Montreal, it looks like we're going to have two teams in the playoffs that wouldn't be considered competitive, and ultimately swayed in many different directions during the regular season. But anything could happen. I'm still confident that a team like Montreal, even with their struggles and even with their, inability to separate, could still go out and stun somebody and surprise somebody, just because, again, they have enough talent and the personnel to get it done. And Hamilton, I mean, dare I say it, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't have a good feeling, but it could certainly happen. We will get into the Hamilton-Ottawa game, but there was a lot of things that I liked in that game from Hamilton, even though it was really slow and there was still a lot of sloppy play and a lot of people, weren't gravitating towards that. I always try and look at the positives. I think people, know that for me best. I really don't try and be negative. So the best way I can look at this is, Montreal, they might not necessarily have a clear path or direction, but they have enough to where, you could never rule them out. And even with Hamilton, like, it's not a good look for the league when you have a team that, hasn't performed very well in the regular season and had to make a significant coaching change, at least with one of their coordinators. Maybe that's not the best look either, but, playoffs, in my opinion, is a separate, we just had this whole discussion of, is making it to the playoffs and knowing you're most likely to lose in the first round even worth it? Well, I view the playoffs as a completely different season. I mean, your playoff wins are not counted towards your win-loss total for the regular season. Same goes for like preseason in the NFL, and CFL has that as well. So I don't know. I just view it as like a fresh start. You kind of have to look at it as every team in the playoffs who makes it is 0-0, and we'll just go from there. Obviously, we know, we have an idea in our heads about how things will pan out. But I remember last year, everyone thought Winnipeg was going to smoke Toronto in the Grey Cup. And, Toronto ended up putting up a very good fight, even after losing their quarterback, and ended up, surprising Winnipeg in one of the better games that I think we've seen in a while in that regard. So, yeah, I don't know. I know that goes a bit beyond just Montreal, but you can't talk about that team without, where are they going? Even if they get into the playoffs, what does the future look like? There's still a lot of questions there, but again, the number one thing is they're still winning to some degree. Yes, they're not beating the good teams, but you are still winning, and it looks like they're going to finish their season with a positive record. And I'd say that's a win, just because, again, there were so many people before the season saying Montreal was going to suck and they were going to be at the bottom of the East and miss playoffs entirely. So when you look at it like that, it's like, okay, well, they, managed to defy expectations in some regards. So, yeah, I think that's where I'm at on that.
I was looking here at the schedule, as Jason was saying. Yeah, Montreal could very much run the table here after their game next week against Toronto. We have the Edmonton Elks hanging out in the chat. Shout out Kevin Brown here. We already gave him his roses, analyzed all of that. So shout out. I don't know if that's Richard or whoever over there, but shout out Edmonton Elks hanging out in the chat. I had a couple things here. All right, so Toronto clinched, right? Their first team to clinch the playoffs this year. We had a tweet from John Hodge. Toronto's might as well start selling their tickets to the East Final right now. The gap between them and the rest of the division is the chasm. What do you make? We've talked Montreal. Jason, what do you make Toronto here? Historic run they're having this season.
Yeah, I mean, they just slowly built a juggernaut over the last 3 seasons. I mean, it started back in 2021 because back in 2019 they had a god awful season. They finished, I believe it was 4-14, and then made wholesale changes. But then the first move was really bringing in Ryan Dinwiddie and just developing slowly. Having good seasons. I think they went 11-7 the previous 2 seasons. They're far going to surpass that this year with already a 10-1 record. And I think that, introducing Chad Kelly to this lineup has turned this team into a juggernaut. And I mean, it's not just that. They do everything in all phases of the game so well. I mean, even down to their special teams, they have excellent special teams. They have, excellent receivers. I love the way the receiving core works together, even though they may not have that true number one star guy they look for like Kenny Lawler or Dalton Schoen. But I mean, they work so well together with their different skill sets. Tavares Daniels, Cam Phillips, all those guys in there. So I think they just have a very well-rounded team. And it feels like, as it pertains to these two teams that met in the East Final last year, the gap is widening between these two teams, not getting closer. So I think that's the most concerning thing if you're Montreal, and it's a great sign if you're the Argos.
The only reason I co-signed the Argonauts being good this year is Mike Mitchell just watched his starting quarterback of the Jets go down 2 minutes, 2 minutes into their drive last night. So that's okay. The Argonauts can be good this year because I think Mike Mitchell needs that for his heart. Yeah, really crazy. I thought if you guys, good viewership on the episode, I thought over the weekend, the Banjo Bowl show with Mike Hogan and everyone else. Mike obviously with the organization, but really just put into context statistically and kind of historically how impressive the Toronto has been this season, especially. Evan, what do you make of Chad Kelly? Anything else with the Argos? Because we got your thoughts on the Alouettes.
Right. I mean, well, again, not much to be said with Toronto. Just we're getting used to this now, and it's similar to Winnipeg. Like when this team gets hot, they can get really hot and just roll over somebody, and they don't look back. They just have that they do have that championship pedigree now. Fortunately for them, and Chad Kelly, I think, continues to exceed everybody's expectations. It cannot be understated how quickly of a rise that he's had. I mean, this time a year ago, Chad Kelly was almost an afterthought. We were all looking at McLeod Bethel Thompson and what his future was going to look like. But now, obviously, Chad Kelly has come in and kind of he's, I guess, passed the torch on successfully, McLeod has passed the torch on successfully to Chad Kelly, and he's carrying that with pride. And yeah, I mean, again, I've said it so many times, but you just can't understate what a great story Chad Kelly is. And, there's so much football lineage, obviously, in his family. But on the personal level, everything that he went, through, and he obviously had some legal issues. And I think ultimately his character kind of kept him away from the NFL. Not the first time we've seen, I guess, an alt-league player have that scenario where, the NFL kind of kicked him out because they had an attitude or whatever. I mean, you can make that argument for, I don't know, Marquette King in the XFL, or obviously Josh Gordon involves some politics, things like that. But Chad Kelly really exceeding, defying all expectations. And, we discussed this on the show last week too, I think, but just signed a big extension, and he is their quarterback of the future. And you can tell he really enjoys playing up there. And I believe one of the clauses in that contract is, he might get more money, or there's some added incentive if he doesn't leave and go to an NFL team, to where they have to, let him go into a camp and then bring him back. So there's definitely a high level of commitment there. And I think, Toronto really wants him to stay. And despite what a lot of people also thought, I think Chad Kelly looks like he wants to stay. He's enjoying slinging the football up north of the border. And, just, again, good for him, good for the team. We will probably, I have a feeling we'll be seeing them in November there in Hamilton.
Yeah, even as this Aaron Rodgers situation, and have been talking all day about, who can they go after, and people have been tweeting like, and obviously we made the joke about the Nathan Rourke, but Nathan Rourke's not on that conversation. Chad Kelly's not, these are, we're still talking Carson Wentz. He's out there hunting deer in the woods, and we're still giving Carson Wentz, who, I had to survive a year with him last year with the Washington Commanders. I think Chad Kelly's in a phenomenal situation. Like I said on the show last week, I think he looks like he is having an absolute blast. He got paid. The guys love him. It's a great coaching staff. I mean, Toronto, like you said, Evan, has just, or whoever it was, has just quietly been putting together a juggernaut here. Jason, anything else on the Argos or Alouettes here? It is really raining. I keep sliding over. It's the dog's gone inside. Water's falling off the umbrella here. Jason, anything else from this?
Yeah, I just want to shout out the Argos offensive line because I think it's an undertalked part of their team. One specific example I want to bring up because this guy has become a star for this team. Ryan Hunter, he was a guy that the Argos selected in the first round back in 2018. So they had to wait 4 years for this guy to go through his NFL opportunities. He was at Kansas City for a while, and then he was with someone else. But then he signed midway through last year, got into the starting lineup by the end of last year, and then this year has been excellent for them, and looks like to be a CFL star for years to come. So I think they've done a really good job building up that offensive line, and I think that's a big part of what they do offensively.
Let's go here. Last game, I'm trying to shake water off of the umbrella here. We have Ticats going in to Ottawa. I had Tim Baines on talking about this game ahead of time. We'll go first to Jason on this one. Hamilton takes the lead. You got another victory here. How did you make of Hamilton?
Well, like I was saying on last week's recap show, that I was expecting Hamilton to bounce back despite being on 3 days rest, despite Ottawa coming off a bye week. I still thought Hamilton would bounce back and beat Ottawa in this one, despite all of that. And I think that, it was a lot closer than I was expecting. Very ugly first half of this one, 6-3 in the first half, but a great second half from both offenses really came alive. I had to watch this game on demand after the fact because I was on a camping trip this weekend, but I thought it was a pretty good game when I went back and watched it. But like I said, Ottawa just cannot beat Hamilton for the life of them. This is their 10th straight loss to Hamilton. They've now Hamilton's now swept the season series 4 years in a row against Ottawa, and I think that you're not going to get very far in the CFL if you're not going to win your divisional games, and I don't think Ottawa's won a divisional game yet this year.
Yeah, a lot was made about, the Hamilton's playing, they're on rest and they got to travel and they played on Monday. Like, it didn't matter at all. I mean, this was a must win for both teams, especially Ottawa. Like you said, I will say with the, now that the NFL, the triple headers with the CFL makes it really difficult if you're on the CFL Plus train. I know we've had many discussions about how great that is for everyone. Like, if you're out on a Saturday, which maybe I was, like, you're kind of out of luck to do a lot of these games. And so I know that this season, and we're working through that, and we had Randy on the podcast talking about that, but like, it's tough. Like, Evan, I don't know if you lived through that as well. Like, we had a birthday party we had to go to Saturday. Like, it just takes a chunk out of your ability to kind of watch these games live.
Yeah, I mean, I personally have a good chunk of time on weekends usually, so I don't mind. I mean, I'll watch games in chunks. Like if it's a triple header, you watch one half, go do something else, come back, the next game will be on or whatever. I don't know. You can schedule it to where, things where you can cover all the games or at least look at them. But I understand. I mean, people have other things to do, and especially on a Saturday. I mean, I know the CFL wants to avoid NFL, with that scheduling conflict, but you're also dealing with like college football, which is equally as big here in the United States. So if you're looking at it from an international viewership perspective, you're still competing with that. And ultimately, yeah, I mean, it is easier to have like a game, kind of one day of the week starting on Thursday or Friday, whatever, or maybe 2 games max on a certain day. But yeah, triple headers could get difficult. I personally, I don't know. I kind of enjoy them just because when I have, time to kill, it's like, you can just kind of sit there all day and kind of, figure out the flow of things. And, unfortunately, every game probably isn't going to be close. But staying on this game, I mean, I was really impressed in the second half with how both of these teams kind of got going, especially Hamilton. My main takeaway from this game above everything else, and besides what Jason's already pointed out, how Ottawa just can't get past Hamilton. That really is the unfortunate story of their season, besides injuries at this point and other things that maybe weren't expected. The thing that I was really impressed about was just Taylor Powell. He has come such a long way since his first start or when he first appeared in a game, has really carried this team through the season, and now they're obviously in a point where they can make playoffs even when a lot of people said they wouldn't. I said several weeks ago that Hamilton, again, had the personnel to get it done, that they had things in their favor, even if they weren't the prettiest team. And, Taylor Powell has definitely been a leader and has gotten them to that point that I projected they would be. Again, just it's really cool to see a rookie quarterback come in, and again, we can kind of just watch him develop game by game. I mean, if you go back, to whenever he first started. I think he's improved in so many areas since then, perhaps more than any other guy in the league. I mean, I don't know, like Trey Ford, I guess, but I don't know if that really counts because he played last year and it was more of a dramatic scenario, whereas no one really even knew who Taylor Powell was going into this season. I think he was an afterthought even to the fans in Hamilton, just because there was so much attention around Levi, and then if that doesn't work out, well, you have Matt Schultz, who's a proven veteran, but obviously both of those options went quickly off the board, and now you have Taylor Powell leading the way. Dustin Crum, I guess, would be another one too in Ottawa, obviously a guy that we've been able to see develop a bit, but I feel like Powell will get more credit because he has ultimately been able to put this team in a playoff position when, to be honest, I mean, again, things a couple weeks ago looked pretty grim for Hamilton too. Like, you talking about this team in the playoffs together really didn't seem like it was going to happen. It didn't really seem possible. But just with the way, again, things have panned out, Hamilton has been able to scrape by enough, even if it's not pretty. Like, same thing in this game. They kind of got into a late shootout, but they got the job done. They got enough. And now it looks like, they can make the final push and get in. So, yeah, I was very impressed with that. Hamilton, continuing, again, Orlando Steinauer, I would never count that guy out. I really do think he has a certain pedigree, and he can really take a team that on paper really, is one of the bottom teams in the CFL and propel them to this position where, they can still, again, like I've said, win games, be in a playoff position, have a decent program going on both sides of the ball. Really impressive on that front, and I think that was my main takeaway from this game overall.
Remember in the preseason, our pregame, whatever it was, the pre-show for the kickoff, and I said, I bet you Bo Levi's going to come in, old guy, not work out in Hamilton. Aaron Rodgers, old guy, going to not work out in, Jets. I mean, just saying. Anyway, Jason, how are you feeling here? Yeah, I feel like this is a very similar. I'm looking at the games coming up, and Hamilton does not have an easy stretch. They're playing Toronto here, and what is it? They're Winnipeg at Hamilton next week. Then they are at Toronto, and then their schedule lightens up a little bit. We got Calgary coming in, and then they're going to Saskatchewan. But same issue here. I mean, so probably going to be Ticats, Alouettes, and then them going into the buzzsaw that is the Argonauts. Like, what do you make of this playoff picture here?
Well, it's nice to get a win, but when you look at it, 3 of their 5 wins this year have been against Ottawa. So I don't know how you can be happy with that as a Ticats fan. I mean, I think that, there's other things that have gone on this year, unfortunate with the quarterback injuries. But Taylor Powell is playing pretty well right now, and it's good to see him get a lot of reps because he might actually be this team's starting quarterback looking forward to next year. As you were talking about earlier, not too many great options out there if you're looking for a starting quarterback. So maybe you just develop your own and go the cheap quarterback route and kind of build a good roster around him. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know. I think Hamilton is going to make the playoffs just based on the poor teams around them. I think that Calgary's not going to be able to catch them. I think if Calgary had won this week, they would have been in a much better position to potentially catch Hamilton, but now they're a full game behind. There's no tiebreaker with the crossover. They have to have a better record than Hamilton in order to get into the playoffs. Ottawa's too far behind now. I think Ottawa's completely out of it. So I think Hamilton's going to make the playoffs, but they're going to be an easy first-round exit again against Montreal, and Montreal has really taken them to school the first couple matches they've seen between those two teams this season as well. So, I mean, really don't know how to feel as a Ticats fan. I think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think it's a really disappointing season regardless.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's boring or predictable, but it does feel, I'm having fun doing all these games, but it does feel like it's going to be kind of a repeat of last year here. Montreal, Toronto, BC, Winnipeg, with Saskatchewan being flipped out there for Calgary, kind of losing that home game on that. One more question to Jason, and then we'll go to Evan. Powell and Crum, are both of these teams riding with their quarterbacks next year? I know we touched Powell, but I mean, Crum, if Mazzoli's done, and I don't know, how does Ottawa address this?
Yeah, it's tough. I think that, Drew Brown could be an option for one of these teams because obviously I think both of those guys, as we talked about with Naylor a couple of weeks ago, I think both of those guys, with Caleris now under contract, I think Drew Brown's going to be a guy that prices himself out of Winnipeg with what he's shown. So maybe he gets a deal somewhere. But I mean, I think that more likely, I think we see both of these teams stick with their guy going into next year, unless, Bo Levi comes back, looks great at the end of this season, or, Matthew Schultz comes back and shows somewhat of a consistent streak of health. I mean, I just think that, Taylor Powell is probably your starting quarterback for the Hamilton Tiger Cats next season, but obviously a long way to go until then.
Are we still awaiting Bo Levi coming back? Is that still a pipe dream here?
Well, I mean, they seemed like they were more optimistic about that than the Roughriders were about Trevor Harris coming back. I think they talked about that. They were like very affirmative, saying, "Oh, he will make a full recovery and is expected to be back this season." That's what they said in the press release. But yeah, who knows? And I think Matthew Schultz is very close to returning. He actually dressed for this game as the third quarterback, so maybe he's starting in a couple weeks. But I think at this point you should just ride with Powell and get the young guy some reps.
Evan, we saw your boy Kyle Loxley get a snap. Powell got really hit pretty hard during the first quarter. What did you make of the Ticats here coming in?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, ultimately this season there's a lot of questions, and you don't know what the future is going to look like. But I agree. I mean, I've said before, just seeing Taylor Powell's development, he can start for this team, and I agree with Jason. Like, regardless of whatever else is on the table. A lot of times you just want to roll with what works. I mean, bringing Matt Schultz back into the game, I wouldn't be against that, but like, he hasn't played in so long, and I mean, that's a good friend of mine. But just from the football perspective, like, he hasn't played in a while, and I'm sure the team is looking at it like, well, if Taylor Powell just went out there, threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, why would you want to get rid of him? Why would you want to pull him? Like, they could really have something here. And looking forward. Yeah, I don't know what Bo Levi's future looks like, and even Matt Schultz, both of those guys could be gone next year, and you just have Taylor Powell as sort of the in-house developmental guy, and someone else behind him. Whether they keep Kyle Loxley there as kind of a hybrid or bring in someone else, I think they have. Who else do they have right now at quarterback? Do they have Antonio Pipkin, or is that
Saskatchewan? He's in Saskatchewan now.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, they could certainly bring in somebody else behind Taylor Powell, I think, next year, assuming that Schultz and Bo Levi are gone. But the team as a whole, I mean, the guy that really impressed, I think, more than anybody outside of Taylor Powell on the Hamilton side was Tim White. They were talking about him at the start of the game, and I mean, he really turned up there when it mattered most. And then Tyreek McAllister had a touchdown in this game too, a name that people should not quickly forget. Even if he isn't always the most productive, he flashes a lot, and he's one of those pieces where he hasn't done a ton this year. Again, he's flashed a couple things, but that to me is one of those key pieces that Hamilton should stick with moving forward, regardless of how they move on in the offseason and handle some of their situations. I think Tyreek McAllister is definitely a building block for that offense and what they want to do. Just a really cool player all around. And, we'll see what happens there, but definitely rooting for him. And, again, someone that you just shouldn't forget about quickly. I feel like next year could be a very big year for him, assuming he's a bit more consistent and he can get some more reps. But ultimately, Hamilton's got things to work with, even though, again, as we've already discussed, maybe not their best season given what's happened, compared to previous years, I'd say.
Well, this is good. We'll start to wind it up here. I got to escape. I was like, did I hear a thunderstorm out there? I don't know what's happening in Seattle. Maybe the roof will be closed for the Mariner game tonight. We'll start to put this to bed. I appreciate everyone today. And, Jason had to work and I had to work and Evan had class. So kind of doing that. We're all kind of moving around, but I appreciate everyone kind of doing that. Should be a good show this Friday. I think we got Jeff Hamilton coming on and Dan Ralph. And then I believe I will be talking to Amonzo Sewell over with the Alouettes. And then I think we have Matthew Betts coming on. So I've been going back and forth. Baker and I were at the game last night. So I think Matthew Betts will be coming on. I was trying to work on, they've got like the CFL Hall of Fame inductions and trying to do some virtual stuff, but I don't know if Lucas will be able to accommodate that or not. Evan, anything else from you? And then we'll let Jason say goodbye.
No, I don't think so. I think I'm just looking forward to week 15. And I think the craziest part that we can end on is, week 15 starts here on Friday in 3 days from when we're recording this. And I mean, week 21 is the last week of the season. So it really feels like the home stretch. I mean, we've been talking now past couple weeks, teams are really starting to separate themselves, but now it almost feels like crunch time, kind of like, on Red Zone, they call it the witching hour, where teams really start separating themselves. That's what it kind of feels like right now. I mean, we just went over so many scenarios. It's like we have a good idea, but there's still a lot of teams that could, surprise and pull through at the end. So definitely getting into, again, sort of the red zone here.
My blasphemous. I've never watched Red Zone, and like we have the one now. We have the YouTube TV plan where we get the games, but I think you had to even pay more to get the Red Zone. And so I had my quad box up on Sunday, but I did not have the Red Zone. Jason, anything else from you? Any other content you have coming out this week before the weekend?
Well, tonight I actually am going to be part of another stream for my NFL show, recapping week 1 in the NFL. So tune over to Coast to Coast Gridiron. That's the guy I collaborate with for that. So much similar to this show. We just talk about the week that was and everything like that. Much like Evan, I'm just super excited for this time of year. I mean, the CFL's in its stretch run. The NFL's back. It's really a glorious time of year if you're a football fan. So really excited for the coming weeks. But pretty soon, like Evan said, also that football is going to be over pretty soon in terms of the CFL.
Well, make sure you give the Washington Commanders win enough credit here on the week 1. That was a tough game we played, and I appreciate that, and Sam Howell and everything else. Yeah, like and subscribe, thumbs up the video. Go if you're not, obviously, I think everyone here is probably subscribed to Jason, but make sure you do that. I appreciate it. Like I said, everyone, working schedules this week. Rain's picking up again, so I'm going to get the heck out of here. We'll see you guys. Thanks.